fellow Americans. Today I'd like to talk to you about a matter of vital importance to our country.
Operation Cyclone and the Afghan fight for freedom. The covert CIA program, Operation Cyclone, while yielding short-term success in obtaining the right of self-determination and self-governance for Afghanistan, was ultimately a long-term disaster responsible for the global war on terror. But first, let's give some background information about Afghanistan prior to the Soviet invasion. On January 1st, 1965, Nur Muhammad Taraki and a group of Marxist-Leninist revolutionaries got together to form the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, also known as the PDPA. They wanted to turn Afghanistan into a modern socialist state. And in 1973, with aid from the PDPA and Soviets, Mohammad Daoud staged a coup against his own cousin, King Mohammad Zahir Shah. Later, Daoud was unsuccessful with progress inside of Afghanistan, and he and the Soviet Union soon had a falling out over the fate of Afghanistan. This infuriated the PDPA, who admired the Soviets and felt left out of the current government system. Then, in April of 1978, Daoud was killed in a violent coup called the Saur Revolution, led by Taraki and the PDPA. Once Taraki was in power, he and the PDPA began to drastically change the country. At first, for the better, implementing educational rights for women and making Afghan society more equal. But that does not mean that the PDPA were innocent. From 1978 to 1979 alone, tens of thousands of civilians were sent to the Poli Taraki prison, where they would face torture and murder. The COD, Afghan intelligence agency, also carried out numerous terror attacks and bombings inside of Pakistan. The PDPA controversially implemented land redistributions which infuriated the tribal people of Afghanistan, sparking fierce resistance. Later, in 1978, the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, also known as the DRA, was created by Taraki. But by mid-1979, the Soviets began looking for a replacement for Taraki. And on October 8, 1979, Taraki was killed by his advisor, Hafizullah Amin, who was even more disliked by the Soviets. They even thought he was an operative for the CIA. And on December 27, 1979, Soviet operatives stormed the presidential palace and killed Amin in Operation 333, putting Barbara Karnal into power. The Soviets also began to send 30,000 plus troops into Afghanistan during the final days of December. And by December 28th, the Soviets had full power over all government buildings in Afghanistan. The start of Operation Cyclone. The United States, unsurprisingly, did not approve of the Soviet invasion, with U.S. President Jimmy Carter stating, "This is a callous violation of international law and the United Nations Charter. It is a deliberate effort of a powerful atheistic government to subjugate an independent Islamic people." President Carter also created the Carter Doctrine in late January. The Carter Doctrine stated that the U.S. would use military force to protect vital interests of America in the Persian Gulf. Let our position be absolutely clear. An attempt by any outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault on vital interests of the United States of America, and such an assault will be repelled by any means necessary, including military force. And on July 3, 1979, President Jimmy Carter would send $695,000 worth of non-lethal aid to the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen were a group of insurgents, organized almost immediately after the Soviet invasion, and they began to call for a jihad. The Mujahideen were composed of tribal Pashtun groups who came together to fight the PDPA and the Soviets using guerrilla warfare methods and hit-and-run tactics. By 1980, the CIA began to filter even more aid into Afghanistan, with an estimated budget of $20 to $30 million. Weapons like the Kalashnikov, RPG-7, landmines, rockets, mortars, all of which were of Soviet origin, were sold to the CIA by Israel and Egypt. The CIA then smuggled them into Afghanistan using the Pakistani ISI, or the Inter-Services Intelligence. Soviet weapons were also chosen to reduce the chance of the Soviets finding out about U.S. involvement. By 1985, Ronald Reagan announced the Reagan Doctrine, stating, "We must stand by all our democratic allies, and we must not break faith with those who are risking their lives on every continent, from Afghanistan to Nicaragua, to defy Soviet-supported aggression and secure rights which have been ours from birth." The U.S. no longer had to hide its hand in supporting the rebels. Now, U.S.-made weapons like the FIM-92 Stinger could be sent directly over to the Mujahideen. But getting the weapons and funding the Afghans was still no easy task. It relied on Pakistani President Mohammad Zia-ul-Haq and his ISI to distribute the funds and funnel the weapons through the border. Weapons like the Stinger could easily take down Soviet helicopters. Even the feared Mi-24D didn't stand a chance against the powerful infrared missile. The Stinger changed the war, as the Soviets no longer had air superiority. Its powerful and expensive gunships could be shot down with ease. And finally, on July 20th, 1987, the Soviet Union began to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. And on February 15th, 1989, the last of the Soviet forces completed their withdrawal from Afghanistan. And in 1992, the Mujahideen had finally overthrown the Soviet-backed Dr. Mohammad Nahibullah, and Afghanistan had finally regained sovereignty and had become a free nation. Or so we thought. A new threat was rising, one of Afghan origin. Its name, the Taliban. Significance. Afghanistan experienced a short window of peace and freedom as a result of U.S. support. But by late 1992, Afghanistan had plunged back into war. The Mujahideen had begun to turn on each other, with wars breaking out between rival ethnic groups. One group rose to the top, a pro-Pashtun group called the Taliban. The Taliban implemented strict laws upon their takeover of Afghanistan. Music and television was banned. Afghan women could not leave their house without a male relative. Women couldn't go to school or work. Beatings, stonings, and executions were common under Taliban rule. The Taliban leaders also took a liking to a man who was infamous in American history. In 1996, Osama bin Laden returned to Afghanistan, where he had previously been a part of a group called the Afghan Arabs. The Afghan Arabs were Muslim fighters, also known as jihadists, who weren't of Afghan origin, but fighters who moved to the country to partake in the Holy War against the atheist Soviet invaders. Coincidentally, the Afghan Arabs received funding from American money that got distributed by the Pakistanis. Two of bin Laden's closest allies, Jalaluddin Haqqani and Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, got most of the funding from the American money, with Haqqani being funded directly by the CIA without ISI interference. And in 1988, bin Laden's sect of the Afghan Arabs turned into the group that we now know as Al-Qaeda. In 1998, Al-Qaeda began to bomb the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. And on September 11, 2001, Al-Qaeda carried out the attacks on the World Trade Center, causing upwards of 3,000 deaths and sparking the global war on terror, which led to 20 years of war and American occupation in the region. And we began to fight the very people that we once funded and hailed as valiant fighters against Soviet imperialism.
Reaching down when the man comes around. The hairs on your arm will stand up at the terror in each sip and in each sup. Will you partake of that last offered cup, or disappear into the potter's ground?